Hello and welcome to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast. Join us on a head and neck cancer journey, presented by Derek Luthwaite.
Hello everybody.
And Chris Curtis.
Hello everyone.
We'll be discussing everything that patients and caregivers need to know about diagnosis, treatment, and so much more.
I'm CEO of the Swallows Head and Neck Cancer Charity, and I'm also a cancer survivor for nearly 10 years now.
And I became a caregiver when my wife was diagnosed with mouth cancer, and it certainly put me on a journey that I never expected to experience during my lifetime. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Swallows Head and Neck Cancer Podcast. Sadly, I've had to bring Chris along again. Hi Chris.
Hi Derek, it's nice to see we'll be talking to a carer today.
Yes, indeed. And thanks for giving away my strap lines, as usual. You pinch all my best lines. I'm delighted to introduce to you all today another caregiver, and we're going to talk about caregiver issues. So let's give a big warm welcome to Sharon. Hi, Sharon.
Hi Derek. Hi, Chris.
So today, Sharon, we're going to just generally talk about some of the issues that caregivers face during the treatment pathway with their individual patients. Now, I know each caregiver goes on a slightly different pathway depending upon the patient and their personality and their particular disease, you know, which part of the head or neck is affected. But I think it's fair to say that there are a number of issues that all caregivers will come across at some point. And I think we just want to let people out there know that they're not alone. There are people here, the Swallows, that have seen it, been there, done it, got the T-shirt. So let's start by just saying, first of all, Sharon, you were caregiver to our wonderful Chris.
I was, yes. Yeah, somebody had to do it.
And still are, I believe, because he hasn't grown up at all yet.
No, not at all. In fact, he's gone backwards in time.
Don't forget I am actually on this call.
Oh, sorry, Chris, I didn't know you were still there. Now then, Sharon, what happened when you, for the discovery part of this journey, when, obviously Chris had some issues with his mouth. I think you had to give him a bit of a slapping to get him to the doctors in the first place. Just tell us briefly what happened from then onwards.
He went to the doctors, was referred to the hospital, went and had a check at the hospital. We were called back in a few days later, basically to be told that he had got head and neck cancer. I can remember vividly the day that we got called back in, because I knew then that I had a feeling it wasn't going to be good news. I can't say I particularly felt worried, but I just thought it's not going to be particularly good news. And then obviously at the hospital, I just got the feeling that the room near to where we were sat was being arranged for us to go into. I don't know why, it was just a feeling I had. And it was. That's where we went in, and that's where Chris was diagnosed.
Did you go in together, Sharon?
Yeah, we went in together. And it was good. Well, I'm not sure good's the right word to use really, but it was good in the fact that they showed us the scans that they'd taken, and showed us like the back of Chris's mouth on the scan and explained where the tumour was. I'm not sure whether Chris can remember all that, but I certainly remember that. And it was quite informative. I didn't at any time worry about it or panic about it. And then from that, they put you into another room, like a waiting room area, just the two of us, and the nurses sort of bob in and out and talk to you about different things and different ways of what they're going to do and whether he's interested in going on a trial and things like that. So it was all quite hectic, to be honest. Loads of things thrown at you that we'd never heard of before and had no real idea what it was. But again, still, quite calm. I was quite calm. I wasn't upset, wasn't worried. But I think that was very different from where Chris was concerned. I think at that point it kind of like glazed over and gone into I'm not listening to any more information. So it was more sort of like on my shoulders to listen to it. And it just went from there then.
Okay, so Sharon, you're in the room, you're getting all this information. You say you're not concerned, or you're not worried, but something's going on in your head. Your mind has got to be, if it was like mine, it's bouncing off the walls at this point with possibilities and probabilities and maybes and ifs and whats and etc. Did you not find yourself sort of struggling a little bit to take in the relevant information? that's being
I don't think you're taking the relevant information. When I say, I just didn't feel it was going to be doom and gloom. I didn't feel we were going to get, horrendous bad news. All right, cancer, being told you've got cancer's bad news, but I didn't feel I needed to go into a panic that, there was going to be anything terminal about it, let's say the word. Yes, they give you a lot of information. I probably couldn't even tell you what they were telling us as such, but I stayed calm as in how I felt at the time. But, they gave us a lot of information about trials and, the process he'll go through, chemo, radiotherapy, dissections, that type of thing. And, it's those sort of things that I didn't really understand what they were. But I think because to me, if a nurse or a doctor or a policeman tell you something, then they know what's right. So I think that's probably why I just stayed calm.
Sharon, I wonder at this initial discussion you had at the point of discovery, were you given any pathway or pointers to agencies outside of the NHS that may be able to offer you help, advice or guidance as to the journey you were about to be going on?
I can't recall anything specific, definitely not. I think in the pack we were giving us, there was a Macmillan book, but I don't think we were giving it for anything specific at the time that I can recall, no.
So with hindsight, do you think that was a loss of opportunity to give the caregiver and the patient some additional support needs?
It is a lost opportunity, but at the same time, I'm not sure how much we would have taken on board. Maybe if it had been in the pack, and it was something that the pack is something I looked at later to sort of like get my head around a little bit more. But I think maybe if there was something in there that pointed you to different either support groups or help and assistance or, monetary help or things like that, depending on what path you're going down, it would be useful to have in that pack, but not to actually be told about on the day.
The events you're talking about were, is it 8 years now?
It's 10 years free now.
Okay, so nearly 10.
No. I know it like it was only yesterday. Oh, it's 10 years on the 13th of May this year. And I can't wait to get there. Because once you're over that 10-year hurdle, then you can class yourself as a real survivor. So I can't wait for that date.
Well, that's good. That's good news for people who are looking for markers of survivorship of this terrible disease. So that's great, Chris, and we wish you the best of luck with achieving that, and the 20-year and the 30-year. Although I see Sharon's nodding her head, definitely not agreeing with me with the 30-odd years.
To be honest, Derek, I feel like we're at 30 years already.
Now, the point I was aiming at here, Sharon, was that 10 years ago, the Swallows as it exists today did not exist then. So there wasn't an opportunity to guide people into a pathway that is available to them today via the Swallows. Is that correct?
There was, I believe, a Swallows, but not in the form it's in now. But that wasn't something, we certainly didn't know about it at the beginning. We got to know about that late on in Chris's probably... the other side of his chemo, radiotherapy and neck dissections, we got to know about that late side of that, but not in the format it is now.
You're embarking on this journey alone, as most of us feel we are when even today, we feel a little bit like that. I certainly did. And for me, it was only 18 months ago, 2 years nearly. So you're embarking on this journey alone, and you're moving down the treatment pathway. What would you say became the most significant issue that you had to deal with as a caregiver with your specific patient?
Me personally, it was suddenly having to become a nurse. Chris's treatment that he had, his chemo, radiotherapy, neck dissections, all needed me to look after him on his return home from the hospital. And it's not just a case of, getting him a cup of tea. When someone's peg fed, you have to look after that peg feed tube. It has to be cleaned, it has to be flushed through. When someone's had a neck dissection, you have to be wary of, obviously he was stapled on both sides of his neck. You have to be wary of, looking after that and making sure it's healing. And then radiotherapy, it does such damage to the neck that, you know, you've got to look after that. So you suddenly have to become a nurse looking after wounds and, you know, horrible areas that, you know, it's just something I didn't want to do and never wanted to be a nurse. I'm quite squeamish at things like that, but you've got no choice. You know, on top of that, you're not particularly explained to how you should be dealing with this. So you're not given tips or ideas or suggestions. So like for example, the radiotherapy burnt Chris's neck so bad, it was worse than, you know, the worst sunburn you can imagine. So you'd wake up in the morning, and if you can imagine, if you've got conjunctivitis, you can't open your eyes. He couldn't get his neck off the pillow because unfortunately it had weeped that much, his neck. He was stuck to the pillow. So it's learning how to deal with that. So it's kind of like those problems. On top of, not only have I got to deal with that in the morning, I've then got to get 2 children ready for school, and I've then got to get to work myself. So it was suddenly just becoming a full-time everything instead of just a full-time mum or a full-time worker. You become a full-time nurse as well. So, you know, there's quite a few strands to it that you suddenly have to do that you've never had to do before.
Okay, so I can relate to a lot of that because I felt myself being pushed into becoming a nurse, and like you, not my calling by any stretch of the imagination. But I was fortunate in that my patient, my wife, although she'd had most of her left-hand side of her face removed, and she was on a peg feed as well. She was a nurse in a previous life, and she demanded that she look after her own gear and equipment. She absolutely would not let me go near the peg feed to either feed her, and I wanted to. I really wanted to get hold of a bottle of Gunge and fill up the syringe and ram it in there, but she would not allow me to do that. That was her area, and she was going to control it. Chris, you've got something to add here?
Yeah, and don't believe her, Derek, because I wanted to do all that, just like your good wife did, but she took control like she always does. So I just let her go with it because I felt sorry for her.
Okay, well, thanks for that contribution, and I know it's not accurate because I've heard the real story from Sharon. So, listeners,
but
please.
It's 2 against 1 at the moment, Derek, and that's not fair.
Derek, this is the guy that on the day he was diagnosed, he was told that it would be very likely that he wouldn't be able to eat due to the, you know, severity of the radiotherapy. So by lunchtime that day, he couldn't eat. He'd not even seen a radiotherapy machine on that day. So, you know, this is the guy that, you know, wants to peg feed himself. This is the guy that wanted to peg feed himself. He couldn't even make his tea that night. He was so poorly. Bless him.
So,
Derek, this is going to be cut out at the end. You do realise?
I understand, Chris. Yes, but I also I've been passing fivers in the direction of John to make sure that all the bad stuff about you remains in.
You're listening to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast.
Sharon, very important here. First of all, we've had discussions with some of the medical companies that are out there that are now offering solutions to and repair of damage caused by the radiotherapy. And so we can eliminate, not all, but we can eliminate a large chunk of some of the damage that he's done these days that probably wasn't available 10 years ago. And we're certainly, through the Swallows, been able to bring that medication and those cures and those treatments to the notice of our head and neck cancer patients, to which I know you're heavily involved via the box that we send out to people who have requested. If that sort of stuff had been available to you 10 years ago, do you think that would have made a difference?
Well, yeah, I would have thought so, definitely. I mean, you know, that's why we're pushing it now. You know, it's there now. We didn't know about it. You know, part of the reason of the Swallows is because, you know, we've learnt that there's things out there that patients don't know about. You know, and that's why the Swallows really just needs to get the word out there of all this information that's out there. We need to get these products out to the patients and carers to make life easier. You know, and if it's there, then use it, because, you know, it's hell without it. So yeah, definitely those support boxes are just lifesavers now. You know, not literally, don't take that in the word, you know, in the literal, but they are. They would have saved so much, you know, just time and effort, you know, and also to see your patient go through something like the burning of the skin the way Chris did is just, it's awful. And then also for children to see that. So if there's a product out there and we can get it out to them, the Swallows can get it out to them, then use it, definitely.
You have what could best be described as a difficult patient, at worst, a real PAS. I, on the other hand, had a very, very easygoing patient who wanted to do virtually everything.
Why am I not surprised, Derek? Why am I not surprised?
Who wanted to do everything for herself. So my question, and this, I would suggest there are as many of each type of patient out there. I don't think you've got more difficult or more easygoing. I just think there's a mix of them all. But with a difficult patient, what's your stance? Do you go down the tough love route? Do you start, insisting? Do you ignore what they're whinging about and complaining about and say, this is what you've got to do if you want to get better? What attitude and approach do you take as a caregiver?
Just leave. Look at their faces. Just leave. Leave the building. Leave them to it. No, I mean, it's difficult to say, isn't it? Because every patient is different. Tough love isn't really what would work with Chris. Certainly not at the beginning. I think I had to pamper to his whim to start with. But I think that, and I think also what's difficult, whether you give tough love, whether you pamper to them, whichever route you take, you do it because you think it's best. But that puts so much pressure, I feel, on a caregiver, because you do want to shake them and you do want to say, book your ideas up, and you do want to say, you're living, you're breathing, they're working on you, they're spending money on you, get on with it. Let's work through this together. Stop giving me extra hassle by being awkward or being a baby or being a pain but it's just, they're all different. So it's difficult to say whether tough love would work or not. I think in the end I had to do a bit of tough love. I had to, for myself really, as much as for Chris, because I've got to the point where sitting on the promenade crying to myself on the way home from work wasn't going to actually change anything. So I needed to go in and say, hey, feed yourself tonight. You need to get on with it. I've got other things to do. But I think when you're first starting out on a journey like this that you've never done before, you do pamper to it.
There are a lot of caregivers out there who feel that they are being stopped from anything in their everyday life because of the demands of the patient. In other words, the patient doesn't want them to go out of the house, doesn't want to leave them alone, doesn't want to be in a separate room from them, which, I certainly didn't have to suffer any of those issues. Quite the opposite. My patient was very much a case of carry on with life as it is. You're scheduled to go out tonight, go out, you've got my number, we've got a phone, we can contact if we need to. And then the other thing is the level of dependency creates within the caregiver, as I understand it, and I felt it a little bit, a feeling of guilt that you're not doing the best that you possibly can. Whenever you fall out or have an argument, or it's because you suddenly then start to get these guilt feelings. Did that happen to you? Did you find yourself in those situations at all?
I don't think I particularly felt. Maybe I should say I felt guilty as listening, isn't I? But no, I don't think I particularly felt guilty, as in, he's got it and I haven't got it. I didn't feel guilty in that respect. Probably I felt guilty in the fact that, I need to be a bit nicer to him because he has got it. No, I probably didn't feel very guilty. I'm not sure I'm going around the right route there, Derek.
Did you have any issues with regards to demands for don't leave me, don't go out, stay in the house?
No, I don't. No, it wasn't. But also he wasn't able to do that because I had to go. 2 children to get to school, work. I had to work full time to make sure that we could keep the house over our head and everything like that. So I think Chris knew that he couldn't put those demands on me. But I have heard it from caregivers that they've got patients that are demanding in that respect. And I think probably where it's not a guilt, but I think that's so difficult for the caregiver because, if you turn around and said, no, I'm going out shopping, how bad do you feel saying something like that when your poor patient can't even get off the settee? So I can see, if you've got that issue going on that they're demanding that you stay in and you're putting your foot down, that is difficult. And I think it's difficult on both sides. I mean, I've said to Chris, we're both on that cancer journey. It's just a different track. He's going down the medical route and we're going down the emotional caring route. And, it's not what I've always done.
So to suddenly be thrown into that position, I think it's very, very difficult for anybody to be thrown into that position. It's very, very difficult.
Chris, I understand it's a long time ago now, and you may not have, as you've aged, you may not have full recall of memory, but, we'll gamble by asking you a question. If you had the magic wand with hindsight to change one attitude that you displayed as a patient during the time of your treatment to your caregiver, what do you think it might be?
Well, we've just been helping a patient called Paul through his treatment. And he's got to be the most strongest, inspirational guy I've met going through treatment. He was very positive. He was going to beat it. He was going to fight it. And everything that was thrown at him, he was going to fight it. I wish I could have been like that and taken some of that pressure I put on me and Sharon away. We both say we don't know how we stayed married through that period. But I do think you come out stronger the other side. I know we joke an awful lot about it, but we did come out stronger that other side. But what I would have changed is try to be more positive and accept that it was a curable cancer. But what you got to also remember is, I've got family that have been given cancer and then died. So as far as I was concerned, cancer was still the big C, and it meant you was going to die. And it doesn't mean you're going to die. But it's all right for me to say that now. But would I change it? I don't know. I mean, I had a scare maybe 12, 18 months, maybe 2 years ago, a little bit of a scare. It ended up being scar tissue. But while I was waiting for those results, I started feeling myself going back to where I was before, being that scared person.
I think the thing is, you go the way you're built. So as much as Chris is saying there, he wish he was more like Paul, he never will be. If he gets a splinter, he's not strong. So you're built the way you're built, though, aren't you? And I mean, Chris
but the big splinters, though, Sharon, they're splinters like 12 inches long.
Well, that's the stake through your heart I'm trying to do. So, I mean, my family, cancer aside, my family's not had, an awful lot of dealings with cancer, but we have had a lot of dealings with medical side. So maybe that's where this not worrying comes in. It doesn't help me with the medical side because I've been fortunate I've not had to deal as a carer, but I think I stay calm on things like this. And I think that's just the way I'm made. I don't think it's because, I'm hard or Chris is soft, but it's the way we're made at the end of the day. It's just, I think part of what the Swallows do with the 24/7 is to just try and help support people understand that it doesn't matter if they're angry, or it doesn't matter if they're getting guilt feelings about the way that they're treating a patient, or if a patient's getting guilt feelings about the way they're treating a caregiver. It's just talking to them and getting them to understand that that's acceptable. We're made the way we are, and we have to deal with it the way we are. Yes, let's try and give everybody some pointers or some signposting to ease some of those problems they might have, but we're never going to change the way people are.
Okay, let's go to another area of frustration sometimes that comes in or comes out from conversations and discussions with caregivers, and this is surrounding the actual hospital environment, where we hear from some caregivers that they don't feel that they're being included, spoken to, or brought into the decision making or discussion process. In other words, there's a feeling of being ignored. They've got something important to add or say to the conversation with the oncologists or the CNSs or whoever it is, the specialists, whoever they're talking to. First of all, did you have any of those issues during your treatment pathway?
It was a long time ago. I don't recall having big problems like that, but I don't think I particularly pushed to get involved. I think it's like I said at the beginning, if I'm told by a nurse or a doctor what I should be doing, I do believe that they're telling me the truth, and I can't recall particularly questioning or wanting to question. I think also we did have a good rapport with Chris's doctors and
the CNS and the consultant. So I think if I did have a question, and I'm sure I have thrown some in, then I think they were answered. So I don't feel I had a big problem in that area.
Let's talk about when you hear your patient answer a question to the doctor, which you know is the biggest load of BS that's ever been passed from one mouth to another. In other words, the doctor says, how are you doing? How are you doing with this? Or how are you doing with that? And the patient gives this diatribe of answers, which are all usually, I'm fine, everything's okay, 100%. And yet, as a caregiver, 24/7, living with the person, you absolutely know that that is not true. How do you deal with that situation?
Chris did do that many a time, whether it be with the hospital, whether it be with somebody calling up. Everybody else always got that he was doing okay, and he was managing, and he was, getting his feed, and he was looking after himself. We definitely had that at the hospital, and on a few occasions I have stepped in and said, no, hold on a minute, you didn't eat last night, or you've not been sleeping particularly well. And I've not had a problem with it. I didn't have a problem with it at the hospital. I know they'll pick up on it and kind of question him a little bit more. But he was, I won't swear, I was going to say he was a bugger for not telling the truth to people, definitely. And that becomes part of your frustration, like you said, as a caregiver, because it just winds you up so much that you think, hold on a minute, I've just had to feed you before we come out, I've had to put everything away, I've had to, buckle the seatbelt for you, and now you're telling them that you're okay.
I'll come back on that and say I think from a patient's perspective, and I know from mine, when you went into the hospital, you felt very safe and secure, and you felt that everybody was around you. So these days now, when I talk to hospitals when they're doing forms, I have to say that patients, when they're in the hospital environment, feel safe and secure. When they're at home, that's when they're the most vulnerable. And that's where I think that sort of breakdown comes from. But I don't think it's right. But Sharon used to always leave me food out, and I would hide it or pretend I'd eaten it and tell her I'd eaten it. But you know damn well you haven't. But the hospital would ask me, how are you feeling? And I'd always say, yeah, I'm doing okay, I'm fine. And it's a total lie. But it's hard to stop it. And it's crazy looking back that you do that, but I couldn't stop it at the time.
Okay, so my question here, Chris, to the patient, you as a patient, is obviously I can't sadly ask my wife the same question because she's no longer with us, but you might be able to answer this one, and that is, did you at any time during your treatment, did you at any time sit down and think how your behavior, responses, attitude was impacting upon your primary caregiver? Or was it all about you as the patient?
Do you want the truth?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. I was going to tell you a little bit of a fib then, but I won't, So, yeah, I don't think I did. It was all about me in the bubble. As long as I was in that bubble, no one could hurt me and no one could get at me. So while I kept that defense up, then that was my safe area. So, I hate it, but looking back, I had no thoughts for anybody apart from me. It
so
was
Sharon,
all about me.
Sharon, as a caregiver, I'm sure you've come across this attitude before. How do we assist and help a caregiver break through that barrier? Because it's just a psychological barrier of defense. I mean, I'm not criticizing Chris in any way here. I guess, Chris, I don't know because I obviously am not a patient, but I guess this was your psychological barrier that went up, and behind it you were safe, and on the wrong side of it you felt unsafe. But as a caregiver, how do we break through that barrier to demonstrate that, we do care and we are on the same journey and we are here to help, not to be a nuisance, a pain, a nag, a whinger. We do all of that, but how do we convince a patient that what we're doing is for their good health, the good of their health? And
I would say Sharon gets a lot on the 24/7 with that issue.
I don't know whether we can change the patient because, it's like I said, they're made how they're made. What we need to do is provide the caregiver with the tools to help them. So, if you've got a patient that's being like that, that's not helping, and not helping themselves and not helping their caregiver, where can that caregiver go for help and support? So who can they talk to? How can they find out if they are doing things right? You know, who's been there, seen it, done it before? Why, you know, can they speak to another caregiver about feeling frustrated about it and upset about it? Can they get help? You know, don't make it difficult for them to get help with money. You know, when Chris was diagnosed, he lost his job. He didn't work for years. You know, that put a lot of burden on my shoulders. It affected the children in what they could or couldn't do as children growing up, football clubs, swimming clubs, that type of thing. So what support is out there to help the caregiver in that way? That way, that you know, they're things that I would have discussed with Chris if he was in the right place. But you can't discuss those things. So let them stay in their bubble, but give the caregiver tools to help them around that bubble so that they have got someone they can discuss these issues with. Because I don't know that we'll ever get them out of that bubble. And not all of them do it that way. You know, so even you know, you're saying that your wife was completely opposite, but there was still issue. I mean, I know I've heard you say you didn't know how to switch the washing machine on. So, you know, where's tips and advice on things like that? Who can I speak to about that? You know, they're just silly little things, but that would have eased your burden a little bit. Because if she was having a poorly day, the last thing you want to do is be asking her how to put the washing machine on. So I think that patient has got to deal with their illness in their way. It's how we help the caregiver get through it.
Another caregiver that we deal with through the Swallows, and one of his biggest issues was the getting those rubber gloves for washing because it made his hands sore because he'd never washed before. You know, it's little things like that I think the health professionals don't realise suddenly gets ploughed onto a caregiver. I've heard Sharon say many a time, you know, she certainly didn't marry me to be a nurse and put up with all the crap that she did. And she had to do stuff that really I should have been doing. And it is that support to say, okay, how do we help that caregiver understand that? And what are the tips to get around it? But it has to come from a caregiver and no one else. It can't come from me as a patient. You know, it can come from you, Derek, and it can come from Sharon and our other caregivers, but it certainly can't come from a patient.
I think it's fair to say at this point, Sharon, one of the issues that we struggle with all the time as a caregiver is getting other caregivers to acknowledge A, the role they're playing, and B, some of the difficulties they're having, and C, probably the most important one, it ain't wrong to talk about it. You know, how for every patient, for every one caregiver we get sharing and talking and giving, you know, help or receiving help, there must be 1,000 patients who do it. And that's the problem we have of getting the message out to the caregivers, isn't it? They don't like to talk about themselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I probably would have been the same at that time. But I think for one, I didn't class myself as a caregiver. I was Chris's wife, so I will do it. I'm here, you know, it's my role as his wife to look after him. So I never really classed, and even now I'm like, well, you know, I'm not sure the care I gave him was what I could call a caregiver. But, you know, I never classed myself as a caregiver, a carer, whatever you want to call me. Getting them to talk is very difficult because, you know, I think at the time of going through it, I think if you talk to people you don't know, you're actually telling tales on your relationship and your patient, and that could be a bit of guilt that you don't want to do that. Are you seen as a failure in your own eyes, not necessarily by other people, but in your own eyes? Are you confessing to a stranger that you're failing? Now, I could talk to some friends, but because they haven't been there, seen it, done it, after about 5 minutes they glaze over because they don't understand what peg feeding is. They don't understand about waking up in the middle of the night and having to change all the beds because the peg feed's gone everywhere. So yes, you might have some friends that might listen for a little while, but I certainly think, you know, some pet carers would talk, but getting them to talk is difficult. But I think what we need to be is around for them at any time they need it. So if it's 6 months after everything's happened or 2 years after everything's happened, and then they need to talk to somebody and to get their head around what happened and why it happened, then that's when we need to be there. You know, we had a caregiver meeting the other night and we had somebody on that's not been on before. And as much as we tried to get them to talk, didn't we, Derek, about them, it still kept going back to their patient. But I think we reflected after and realised, well, actually, he was talking about him, but through his patient, but kind of like how it affected him. But he didn't want to come out and say, my patient makes me do this, my patient makes me do that. But I think at the end of the night, he felt so much lighter because he'd expressed his story. And, you know, and that's what we just need to be there at any time that they need it, whether it's at the beginning, middle or end of their caregiver journey.
Sharon, the subject of talking about caregivers could go on forever and ever because it's a huge topic, just like the patient's journey is a huge topic, and every step of the patient's journey is mirrored by a similar step taken by the caregiver. If there was one thing, Sharon, last question, if there was just one thing that you could, you know, pull out of your magic box and change today for caregivers, just one thing, one magic thing. Cost is irrelevant, you know, timing is irrelevant, reality is almost irrelevant. One thing, what would you choose to give caregivers today if you had that power?
The ability to divorce within 24 hours.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks. That's a great one. That's I've got no comeback on that, Derek, neither. And your tears are rolling down your eyes now. And you know, we've done a few of these, and now I'm divorced. Thanks, Derek. You can put that magic wand of yours where the sun don't shine.
Well, let's be fair here, Chris. It wasn't my magic wand. This was Sharon's magic wand she was waving. Okay, so I'm not taking any responsibility. But for £25 an hour, I will do some marriage counselling for the pair of you.
The Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast is designed to help and support both patients and caregivers.
I'll try it again, sorry. You knew I had to throw one in there, didn't you? No, I think I don't know whether there is a magic wand really, but I think certainly if, like I said right at the beginning, if in that pack there had been something to say, hey caregiver, look at me, and given me some advice or somewhere to go or some tips, then I think that would have just, because it is all patient, and I think sometimes, you know, whether it be in the dead of the night or 6 months down the line, you could find that piece of paper that says, hey, look at me. And that's, you know, that's when the caregiver can start thinking, oh, I can do this or this.
Chris, same question to you. What would you offer the caregiver?
What would I think the same as what Sharon said, that bit of paper or that card that says, when you need to talk and just have someone to listen to you, then either just ring this number and there'll be someone at the end of that phone just to listen and take that burden away from you for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or like some of the calls Sharon takes, over an hour. But I think I don't know what, from a patient's perspective, I think it's hard because we're dealing with our journey. And, you know, we've had this debate all the time, Derek, and thank God you came on to develop this caregiver side with Sharon, because I can't get a magic wand out for the caregiver, because if I'm really honest, I'd rather spend my wish on a patient. Is that selfish? I don't know. Yeah. But also I think it's because I'm coming from a patient's perspective. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that really, apart from if you can come out the bubble sooner.
I've got one wish that I'd like to grant all caregivers. And I don't often answer some of my own questions like this, but I've got the one wish that I'd like to grant.
Well, I'll tell you what, Derek, don't answer your question. If you had a magic wand and you no money, no nothing, and don't worry about money, don't worry about time, what would your wish be for a caregiver? That was a brilliant question, you know. I wish I'd have thought of that.
I wish that there was never a feeling of guilt about talking about the caregiving journey, that they could just open up and spill it all out to people who understood, have been, may not be on exactly the same journey they're on, but certainly a similar journey, but that they felt free and unburdened to just talk about it. Because that's the biggest hurdle we have at the moment, is getting them to talk about it. And I think that's entirely down to the fact that people sometimes feel, and I think, you know, Sharon, we've talked about this. I know, Chris, we've covered this before, there's a feeling that I've not got cancer, so what have I got to whinge and moan about? Well, the reality is, folks, if you're a caregiver, you're not only doing your normal life, but you're taking on a role that you've never been trained for. You've been given little guidance or support to fulfill. And it's no wonder that you might find yourself in swampy waters and feeling of sinking. But there are people here, certainly at the Swallows, who know where you're at, can know how to help you overcome some of the issues. We don't have magic answers, but what we can give you is a listening ear and the benefit of our own experiences. And that will be my wish, Chris.
That's a lovely wish, Derek, that. And, who knows, maybe we can make sure that happens. But I will give you one, how I see it. The day you get diagnosed and our partner or our wife goes home and has to become a fully educated, experienced nurse with no training. That doesn't happen in the NHS, but it happens with all caregivers for whatever disease or cancer. It happens overnight, they become a nurse. That's wrong. So thinking back, maybe my wish would be that didn't happen. And I don't know how we solve that problem, but I think that's the bit that is totally wrong.
Well, that's a question that we'll pause on, Chris, and we'll let that one sink into the ether and let people ponder on that one.
No, but I've got to come back to you now, Derek, because we've talked about me, we've talked about Sharon, and I have to say, without all joking aside, when I got cancer and through my journey, if I hadn't have had Sharon by the side of me, I wouldn't be here today. So, that to me will always be close to my heart. But, unfortunately, your wife didn't make it. But if looking back, is there anything that she done that really, really got under your skin as a caregiver? There must have been something that she done that you thought, looking back, thinking, my God, I can't believe that she would even do that or say that. Was there something there?
Sadly, yes. And we've alluded to it earlier in the conversation. She just would not tell the medical staff the truth about her state of health when they asked it. I don't want to put any bad memories on my wife's life, but she did like a little drink. But it was getting excessive, and she would just tell porcupines to the doctors about how much alcohol she was consuming. And I could not see how telling that lie because she was embarrassed about it would help her. But how can I, as the caregiver in the meeting in front of her, contradict her and tell the doctors and the CNSs and whoever happens to be there, actually, no, she isn't taking 5 units a week. She's taking 15 units a day. I was never given the opportunity to talk outside of my wife's hearing. And that, I felt, is one of the biggest gaps in the total treatment pathway, that the caregiver doesn't get the opportunity to have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, however long, with the team of medical specialists, just to put them right on a few issues. So that was a real frustration. So
we both, Sharon's obviously talked serious about a lot of the stuff, and you have about your wonderful wife. Derek, give me one funny story that happened through her treatment that you would like to share with us.
It's not so much that it's funny, but I think it was testament to her strength of character. She'd lost half her face. She'd lost all but 3 of her teeth. She'd lost her lip line, and she had a huge cleft in her bottom lip. I mean, a huge cleft. She did not suffer from what you do, Chris, with the dry mouth. She suffered from the Niagara Falls syndrome, which is exactly the opposite. It was like a fountain constantly. And because she had this huge cleft lip, it would constantly pour out all the time. So the poor lass had to walk around with a towel or a huge piece of cloth or whatever to keep mopping it up. And it did affect her. It did affect her speech a little bit. But we were out one day. We were out in in our local casino. We'd gone to the casino for the night. We were going to spend a few pennies on the tables. We were going to have a meal. She was still on a peg feed, but we also knew that she could swallow liquid stuff. So she was all right for drinking, Sharon. She was still a great party goer up until the very end. Okay, because her last dying wish was get me a little nip, which I took care. But the testament I wanted to refer to was she was in this environment. She was all dressed up, and she was never embarrassed to show her face. She never tried to hide it. She never wore a scarf over her head. She never put a hood up or anything. What had happened to her, and she was stopped in the middle of the restaurant area by an older woman who said, "Oi, what's happened to your face then?"
Wow. Really?
And Jane just turned around to her and said, "Well, as it happens, I've just had I've just been diagnosed with cancer of the mouth, and I've had most of my jaw removed and most of my teeth removed, and as you can see, I've got this split lip, and you can also see I dribble quite a bit. But she says I'm having a good time here tonight. What's wrong with your face?" And I thought that was a brilliant little, it said everything about Jane's tenacity during her journey. She was never hid behind anything. She faced up to it all the, and I don't mean that as a pun when I say she faced up to it all the time. So,
that was incredible. Thanks for sharing that, Derek.
Oh, brilliant, Derek.
Yeah.
There's a story that you always share, which is when you were feeding me through the peg and the kitchen ceiling.
Yeah. You found it hilarious. I'm not sure I did at the time. So Chris being peg fed, obviously couldn't do it himself because the cancer he had obviously affected his arms and his hands, which meant he did nothing. So I've been at work all day, and I used to wear a black suit to work, so dressed it head to toe in black, and I wear glasses as well. So I come in, and he's sat at the kitchen table waiting to be fed because, he's not been able to do it himself. So I rush and start, trying to force this pink liquid into this peg, which is not the best thing to do. So, but of course, in frustration and maybe just a little bit of anger, I'm forcing this pink stuff in a tube down into his stomach. And I think you coughed, didn't you, Chris? And of course, this peg shoots all of this pink, milkshake liquid straight back up through the tube. It covered me, my glasses, the ceiling in the kitchen, the chair, my black suit. It was everywhere, and he just sat there howling. And I was just, it stinks. That Ensure stuff stinks. And it's just, we laugh about it now, but certainly at the time, and it took we've had to have the whole kitchen decorated and, ripped out and refitted to get rid of it. Well, that's my excuse anyway. But that's about the funniest thing he did. Well, he thinks it's funny. I didn't at the time.
So, guys, we're coming to the end of this particular broadcast. I'd like to thank Sharon for joining us. I know you're not always keen on jumping in on the microphone and chatting with us, Sharon, but we are grateful that you do it. We have to have some voices out there other than mine, and so I'm just delighted on this particular episode. We were 2-1, and it's usually the other way around. So we've been able to so thanks a million for coming on and sharing some of your stories, and thanks for the great work you do through the Swallows and the caregiver program of the Swallows. It's much appreciated.
No worries. Thank you for having me.
We will obviously talk to caregivers again at some point in the future on various topics as we go through this journey. But without further ado, I have to say that it's Chris's time to star. He has one job to do. You know that he's interrupted me 1,000 times already, so he doesn't think he's only got one job to do, but he has only got one job to do. And this is it. Chris, it's advert time.
So if you want to contact the Swallows, our 24/7 support line, which I have to say, if you're a caregiver and you call this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, Sharon answers the phone, who's on obviously the call today. And it's 07504 725059. And it is for patients as well as caregivers, so please call that number. Our website is all the W's, theswallows.org.uk. We're also on Twitter at the Swallows Group, and our Facebook book page is just type in Swallows Cancer Support and you'll find our Swallows page. So yeah, just give us a call anytime you want, 24/7.
And that's the dog.
Thanks, Chris, for that. Well, people, this is probably the last episode in this particular series of podcasts from the Swallows. We're hopeful that we'll be back in the future with more stories, more interviews, and more discussions about your and our head and neck cancer journey. Stay tuned for the future. Keep an eye on the website, and we look forward to talking to you again. Take care, everybody. Stay safe.
Thanks all. Bye.
You've been listening to the Swallows Charity Head and Neck Cancer Podcast. For more information, please visit www.theswallows.org.uk. We hope you'll join us again next time.